So it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Nicholas Money. Nicholas is Professor of Biology and Western Program Director at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. He is an international expert on fungal biology and author of popular science books that celebrate the microbial world, including The Rise of Yeast, How the Sugar Fungus Shaped Civilization, and Molds, Mushrooms and Medicine, Our Lifelong Relationship with Fungi, which is also the topic of tonight's talk. His writing is noted for blending first-rate science with stories of human interest. And over to you, Nicholas.
Thank you. Let's see if I'm successful with the screen share. It's the first thing to do here. That look good to you?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and close to dinner time, no doubt, in London to hear all about molds, mushrooms, and medicines, the human-fungus symbiosis. I'm going to begin with the greatest poem, or a little bit, the greatest poem written in the English language. And you're all saying, oh, it's going to be Spenser's Faerie Queene. No. Milton's Paradise Lost, 1667. And I've amended a few of the words here to introduce the topic. From Book 1 of Paradise Lost. Sing, heavenly muse, what in them is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of mushrooms to men. And we'll substitute humanity for men, given that this is now the 21st century. So I'm going to be, well, I mean, lofty goal here, might as well aim high, justify the ways of mushrooms to humanity. I'm going to be talking about the human-fungus symbiosis, near and far, looking at what? Looking at the mycobiome, the fungal component of the more diverse microbiome, from the surface of the body all the way into the interior of our digestive system, and then to look outward to our conscious and unconscious interactions with the fungi and our reliance on their ecological activities and nature. To begin with, though, I need to introduce the fungi, because I'm sure there's lots of you in the audience this evening that are totally unaware of the richness and beauty of the mycological world. Can I play that again? I'm going to play that again. Look at this. This beautiful mushroom here, illuminated with a flashlight, maybe from a cell phone, and you can see these spores wafting away from the cap, this fairy dust. Individual mushrooms can release up to 30,000 spores a second, and I've spent a good deal of my research career studying spore release mechanisms. I'm very interested in biomechanics. And I'm using this just to introduce the fungi before we talk about their relationship with the human body. One of the organisms that absolutely fascinates me is the artillery fungus. So it's a mushroom, but it's a little thing. It's got a diameter of about 1 millimeter. I see this all around my house in Ohio. It grows after rain on landscaping mulch, so wood chips or compost around the base of trees. It's a fantastic system. It's a beautiful mechanism designed and perfected by natural selection, and it works as a cup within a cup. And the inner cup actually, well, I can show you this here. Hopefully you can see this on your screen. It works as it's a snap buckling mechanism. So the membrane that you can see on the right-hand side is under pressure and it flips outward. We actually, in biomechanics, we call this snap through buckling. And I don't know how much you'll be able to see this, but I'm going to try and, you can use these kids' toys, courtesy of Jeff Bezos and Amazon.com. Is it going to go? That one's not going to work. There we go, snap buckling mechanism. They call them poppers, apparently. not the illicit drug, but anyway, you get the point here, hopefully. These things are extremely difficult. So there we go, there's another one. Snap through buckling. This thing, that's how this works, the artillery fungus. We got a couple of high-speed videos for you here to show this. You're going to go, bam, look at that. So the fungus is actually ejecting this mass of spores. It's a capsule containing up to 10 million microscopic spores. And it fires this over a distance of up to 6 meters. Ka-ching. It's just a fascinating mechanism. One example of many of the beautiful mechanisms of spore discharge that have evolved among the fungi. Those fruit bodies, so the mushroom with a cap, the umbrella-shaped cap, and then the artillery fungus, these are the sex organs produced by fungi that grow in soil or in wood or some other substrate in the form of colonies or mycelia of filamentous tip-growing cells called hyphae. Classic diagram here showing how these hyphae have developed and branched from a single spore. And I've got a couple of little quick GIFs for you here. Oh no, not quite yet. So this is a scanning electron micrograph showing an individual hypha and it's produced a couple of branches. These are just beautiful, beautiful cells, courtesy of Jeffrey Gadd from Dundee. And then look at this. And a couple of brief video clips here from my friend Patrick Hickey. He's an investigator that lives in Edinburgh. Patrick's produced these beautiful videos of hyphal growth. And in this particular instance, then the cell's been stained with fluorescent dyes to light up the membranes in the hypha, in the filament, and then also the nuclei. And you can see this in lower magnification here, this streaming that's going on through the mycelium, and that's in real time. I'm getting an awful message that says Zoom needs to be updated. If this happens, I'll be back with you soon. Hopefully I can ignore that. Well, what am I going to do here? The bloody thing won't stop. I must apologize for this. This is a computer error. I guess I'll keep...
You're coming through fine, Nicholas. I don't think you need
Yeah, it
to
says
worry.
quit an update. Well, I guess I can just try and ignore this here.
I think you can ignore
There
it.
we are. Ernest Hemingway said, grace under pressure. Okay, when we look at the way that hyphae grow in culture and in nature, they show this exquisite level of sensitivity to their surroundings as they explore surfaces and they penetrate rotting wood. They show all kinds of shape changes and changes in direction as they penetrate these food sources. These illustrations come from a lovely paper. I really can't minimize that. It's refusing. From Alexander Brand's lab, and you can see here some of the shape changes that fungi engage in then as they explore surfaces. This has led to the suggestion that fungi perhaps evince some form of primitive consciousness, and evidence for this comes from experiments that show that fungi indeed can actually remember the locations of food, that they have this capability of actually remembering the location of food materials in their environment, which is really astonishing. And so we can indeed refer to the fungi as organisms with a primitive form of consciousness. And as I say in the book, the potential for communication is probably limited to the slow passage of chemical signals, and the fungus is unlikely to be relaying anything other than, I'm hungry, I just found food, will you mate with me? This covers most of human discourse too, but you get the point. Fungi do not dream or dread. Another video here, it's a time-lapse video here from Patrick Hickey showing mycelia that are actually growing on wood chips. And they're bioluminescent, and they're showing these slow pulses of light These are taking place over the course of many minutes. So if in the woods, if you actually see this, it's referred to as foxfire. And if you sort of look at the side of the trail as you're walking along the woods after rainfall, you might be lucky enough to see this pale green glow. Maybe this is suggestive of some form of deeper reasoning of consciousness. Perhaps, perhaps not. So I've talked about filamentous fungi. Colonies form from mycelia. Fungi also exist in the form of yeast cells, and yeasts are going to be pretty important to the rest of this presentation, where I'm talking about interactions between fungi and the human body. So you can see here an older yeast cell on the right side of that image, and she's referred to as a mother cell, and daughter cells have actually budded and snapped off the surface of that older mother cell. So I'm going to be talking about filamentous fungi. Oh, I should have mentioned too that that's using a colloquial sense. We refer to these just filamentous fungi when we look at colonies in the absence of a fruit body. We can refer to these as molds. So it's molds and also yeast cells that I'm going to be discussing. 10 themes for you this evening, beginning with interaction. All these little things are jumping up on my screen. Interacting to begin with, thinking about the surface of the body. We interact with fungi from the womb to the tomb. When I used to give presentations about mold spores and their allergenic effects and their carriage of mycotoxins, I used to say that we inhale spores from first breath to last gasp. That's true, but we need to extend the bookends if we're looking at our wider interactions with the fungi, since we're interacting them with them in the womb and in the grave, in the womb to the tomb. We know that we're interacting with them before we're born because DNA analysis of the meconium, so the first deposit from the newborn baby, shows the presence of the signatures of yeasts, including Candida yeasts. The suggestion is here that we develop a swallowing reflex quite early in development. And the suggestion is that we're actually absorbing these yeasts from the amniotic fluid when we're developing. And rather than this being a negative interaction, this could have some real positive benefits, that there are low concentrations of yeast cells, or at least fragments of yeast cells in the womb, and that by absorbing them through this swallowing reflex, this is some form of early tutoring of the immune system for what will be a lesson really for life, because we're going to be born into this environment that's teeming with fungi and other microorganisms. So it's this perhaps early stages in which we're beginning to figure out, or the body is beginning to learn, the difference between friend and foe, and actually to recognize some of these fungi like Candida yeasts before we're actually exposed to many more of them. Then, all of us right now watching this, we live in that the ... the red arrow there. If we're fortunate enough to be buried naturally, I don't see why we should care, but if we're fortunate then to degrade naturally in the woods perhaps. Fungi are important in the decomposition of the human body, of the corpse. They're involved in the bloat stage, early stage, where we get this high diversity of fungi, some of which are coming from the gut mycobiome, the fungal component of the microbiome in the gut, that are involved in soft tissue degradation. And then right at the end of this process, the most resilient tissues, the keratin, our hair and nails, these are degraded by, it's actually a particular group of fungi that specialize in this process. And for those of you, unfortunately, I can't see any of you right now, but if you have more hair than me, you might have as many as 2 cheeseburgers worth of calories in your hair. So this is a fantastic food source for any microorganisms that can actually make use of this. I'll come back to calories in a bit. So what happens between the womb and the tomb? 3 examples I'm going to give you here of organisms that are living on the surface of the body. I'll call this touching. And the way in which we transform the microbiome through our interactions with the fungi. First example, this is Malassezia, the dandruff fungus. And this is a fungus that actually feeds on the sebum, the waxy secretions on the surface of the scalp. And if it gets too festive, it can cause dandruff. And we can treat dandruff with a dandruff shampoo, an anti-dandruff shampoo. What will be a dandruff shampoo be? Something that stimulated dandruff. Anyway, like this, Head and Shoulders. Head and Shoulders, which is produced or was rather developed in Cincinnati, Ohio, our Queen City, close to my office here. It's actually their best-selling product. It's the best-selling shampoo in the world. But this or generic versions of anti-dandruff shampoos often contain pyrithione zinc. So if you look at your shampoo bottle and look at the active ingredients, you might see pyrithione zinc. This is an antifungal agent. It stalls the growth of fungi on the scalp, and that's how it actually controls dandruff. We're changing the microbiome through this simple act of showering and shampooing, or those of us that use Head and Shoulders are doing this. That pyrithione zinc actually may be changing some of the concentrations. It's possible the concentration of yeasts elsewhere on the body's surface, and then it goes into the groundwater. We don't know that it has any specific deleterious effect on us, but we do know from lab experiments that pyrithione zinc affects the fertility of amphibians. So it actually reduces, it actually interferes with sperm production in frogs, which is interesting. So there could be more going on here. It's just something to consider. We're clearly changing the activity of fungi on the body through this cultural practice, recent cultural practice. There's about up to 1 million yeasts in a postage stamp area on the scalp surface. And so, yeah. Here we go. Here's a shoe from my closet. If there are British academics out there, you'll be well aware that, American academics are much more poorly compensated than our colleagues in the United Kingdom. This is a 5,500-year-old shoe. It's the oldest shoe that we're aware of, found in an Armenian cave. Shoes, a wonderful thing, a wonderful addition to our lives. But it comes with, or shoes come with, the hazard of athlete's foot, a fungus called trichophyton. Shoes, the behavior of wearing shoes seems to have actually had a profound effect on the activity of this fungus. So here's the way this story goes. If we look at the highest diversity of trichophyton, different species, we find an amazing diversity of these athlete's foot fungi, or relatives of, in Africa, which is, of course, our birthplace as a species. We see the highest diversity of Homo sapiens in Africa, in where in the Rift Valley and in sites in Southern Africa. So our biodiversity and the biodiversity of this fungus overlap. The suggestion has been made that when we moved out of Africa, and we moved to cooler climates, and then adopted the practice of wearing shoes, that we transformed a harmless commensal, something that lived on the surface of the skin but never caused any problems, and we transformed this into a really irritating pathogen, which is really interesting. And you still find this diversity of trichophyton species in Africa and different strains of those species in Africa. And indeed, it can exist as a harmless fungus on the surface of the skin. But yeah, this is an issue. There's a downside to wearing shoes. Another beautiful example of the way that we've transformed our relationship with the microbiome. Now I come to the third and most serious example of this, which is Candida auris, which is this Candida species that's responsible for infections that don't respond to any of the available antifungal agents. I mean, this is a fungus that can get into, it's a hospital-acquired infection. It gets into the body through catheters usually. And then once it's there, it can establish this life-threatening mycosis, human infection. The suggestion's been made that the reason that this fungus has become a problem might be climate change. Here's the reasoning, that as the temperature of the planet's increased, this fungus and other fungi have become adapted to growth at these warmer temperatures, and this puts them in a position of being able to deal with human body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius, and is one of many virulence factors. This is something that I've written about. I find this unlikely since, despite the ravages of climate change, global average temperatures increased by what, 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is child's play for the fungi. Many fungi are quite able to deal with human body temperature. I just don't see this as the thermal barrier. I'm just not convinced by that long-standing hypothesis. And I think instead we might point the finger at agriculture. We use fungicides called azole antifungal agents in agriculture that we spray on cereal crops and fruits to control fungal growth. These come from the same family of chemicals that we use to treat fungal infections in the human body. It seems, therefore, something that we should be exploring in more detail. It seems, therefore, possible that as we've increased, and millions of tons of these azole antifungal agents are used in agriculture, that this may have changed the activity of fungi. It may have driven the microevolution of different fungi that are resistant to these azole agents. And there's actually good evidence for this looking at soil fungi already. So this may have translated to the issue of the awfulness of this particular pathogen. It's certainly an example of another example of the ways in which we changed our relationship with fungi through, in this case, agriculture. But these are all cultural practices of different kinds. All right, let's go on to the next theme: interaction with the human body through breathing. Alternaria, the asthma fungus. So why do I call this the asthma fungus? Alternaria spores are everywhere. Alternaria spores are present, in almost every breath we take. We're inhaling whole spores of Alternaria or particles derived from Alternaria spores. And they carry proteins on their surface that they're allergens that are as damaging, I say in the book, to asthmatic lungs as birds sucked into jet engines. They can provoke asthma attacks. And asthma is obviously a very serious condition and indeed is a life-threatening condition in many patients. And you can see here spores collecting on a filter on the left, and then we've got on the right there some of these really pretty under the microscope, these Alternaria spores. Many spores of fungi, all spores of fungi, carry proteins on their surface. And some of these really do react with our immune systems. And we can look at this through skin testing of asthmatic children. This has been done. And if we scratch in the Alt-A1 protein and other proteins from fungal spores onto the skin of these children, they'll react with a wheal and flare reaction, showing that their immune systems react with an inflammatory reaction to these spores. Spores, I think, are the missing link in respiratory medicine because they're ignored in favor of pollen. I mean, I've looked at a number of books on asthma, many books on asthma, that just don't even mention fungal spores, and yet there's very, very good evidence that spores are an important stimulus for asthma attacks. I mean, these proteins, and they act as keys on the spore surface that actually, when they interact with what mast cells and basophils, they actually stimulate the release of histamines. They're a big part of the story of asthma. And so in the book, Molds, Mushrooms, and Medicines, I explore our relationship with fungal spores from the particular perspective of allergies, asthma, allergic rhinitis, and other conditions. All right, let's move on. Spreading. Most of the fungal spores that we inhale that end up sticking in the lung mucus are destroyed by our immune defenses. But fungal infections can, unfortunately, develop into the foulest flesh-melting diseases ever pictured in a pathology textbook. We've got here some fungal hyphae. These would be from a mold, then a filamentous fungus that's penetrating the gut wall. And we see these kind of awful infections predominantly, but not wholly, in patients whose immune systems have been compromised in some fashion. This damage to the immune system represents what? An invitation to fungal growth, not just in the lung mucus, but elsewhere in the body. You may be aware of, during the COVID pandemic, of a phenomenon referred to as the black fungus. Have I got a picture here? Yeah. The black fungus, which was as close to an epidemic level of fungal infection in India, caused by this particular fungus or group of fungi. This is actually a species of mucor, this is a rhizopus. So these are members of the group of fungi called the Mucoromycota. And these showed up as these awful infections in India among patients that have been treated with steroids to control their immune response to viral infection, so that this actually lowered their defenses against these fungi that we refer to as opportunists, resulting in these awful infections. And if you want to prevent yourself from sleeping tonight, you could do a Google search and you'll see these awful clinical images online of patients with facial infections and orbital infections and eye loss. It's awful. But what happened here, it's a perfect example of the way that an opportunist works then. This fungus, or these fungi in this group, are everywhere. They include the fungi that we find on the surface of fruits that have been left out on kitchen counters. They'll grow in the refrigerator. So these actually are involved in food spoilage. They're everywhere. But when our immune system's damaged, these fungi can really get going. What else? They can grow in the brain. They can grow in the brain. They can grow from the nasal passages and actually penetrate the brain case, again, leading to these awful infections. And there are other fungi that can grow in the brain. One of the, or a series of studies that have interested a lot of medical mycologists recently have been studies performed on brains taken at autopsy from patients that had been that had suffered from Parkinson's disease and other neurological conditions, and they seem to be enriched in fungi. And there are some issues with these experiments, but many of them are quite well controlled. They're very well controlled, and they certainly deserve more investigation. Going a little bit further, there's been a suggestion that there's an active brain mycobiome, a cryptic mycobiome of fungi, of yeasts that are actually growing in low levels of yeasts in the healthy brain. And then we see these things sort of come out of hiding when a patient passes away. Whether there's any relationship between the growth of these fungi and neurological illnesses like Parkinson's is unclear. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but this whole relationship between cause and effect is really, really difficult to tie down. Are these fungi, if there are fungi that develop in the brain of patients with Parkinson's disease or ALS, are they a consequence of brain damage from other causes, or are they actually involved in the etiology of those diseases? So I'd go back to calories, didn't I, when I talked about hair? A couple of cheeseburgers up there. The brain's really calorie rich. I mean, it's equivalent to it's got as many calories as a roast chicken. So this is a particularly attractive target to any organisms that can make their way in there. Digesting, next theme. Fungi in the gut, the mycobiome. There's 40 trillion bacteria in the gut and only billions of yeasts. And in sort of early versions of the Wikipedia page for the microbiome, it's really sort of dismissing the idea that the fungi were important members of the gut microbiome. But that's I mean, they weigh less than a yeast. Excuse me, they weigh in total cumulatively less than a raisin. But this elides the fact that the fungi are the giants of the microbial world. And if we actually think about the total surface area of these cells, when we're getting up to these tens of billions, potentially tens of billions of yeasts, I calculated that that represents the equivalent of the in surface area of the surface of the top of an 8-person dining room table. So if we think about that much fungal growth, those fungi or fungal particles from fungal cells moving through the gut, this begins to explain how such tiny organisms can have such a profound effect upon our health. And there are a host of papers that have been published really every week that are linking the levels and types of fungi that we find growing in the gut to all kinds of bowel diseases, including a whole spectrum of inflammatory bowel diseases, and then all the way to colon cancer. So the tabloids, unfortunately, make a lot of this again before we can tie down that cause versus effect relationship. But there's a lot going on in the gut in terms of the mycology of the gut. And so I think we need to watch this space. And really, for those of us that follow the medical mycological literature, there's interesting studies that are being produced now on a weekly basis. All right, moving on here. Nourishing, I'm going to speed through this. So we got time for some questions. Yeah, fungi are important in our foods. What? Fermentation of cheese, the skins of preserved meats like salami. We've got many traditional Asian foods like tempeh that are fermented by filamentous fungi, actually by members of that group, the Mucoromycota. Interestingly, same as those opportunistic pathogens. They're involved in raising raising bread dough, soy sauce, producing soy sauce, and of course alcoholic fermentation. If we add up the economic value of all of these activities, it's worth about $1.5 trillion, $1.5 trillion to the US economy, which is about 5% of the GDP of the United States of America. I mean, that's more important than the automobile industry. So fungi are very important in food production and drink. Let's talk about a British product, corn, which is sort of an exotic in the Midwest where I live. That's not true. You can buy it in almost any supermarket, grocery store in Ohio now. Yeah, mycoprotein, corn produced by a filamentous fungus. It's shown here. It's a species of Fusarium. This was discovered, the fungus was discovered. It's an unusual fungus. It was discovered in 1967 in the Buckinghamshire village of Marlow Bottom, which I visited quite recently and took this photograph of the road sign. I have to tell, when I give talks in America, I have to dissuade the audience from thinking that Marlow Bottom's like Grantchester. It's incredibly busy traffic, going through there. But anyway, in a compost heap in 1967, the corn fungus was found. It's an unusual fusarium because it produces lots of protein, but doesn't produce toxins called mycotoxins. Very, very important. Maybe Marlow Bottom needs a sign showing that it's the birthplace of biotechnology. Other contenders for the birthplace of biotechnology, I mean, South San Francisco claims this because that was, of course, the location of Genentech. But Cincinnati has a good case to make. It was the site of the first commercial yeast plant produced by the Fleischmann brothers on the banks of the Ohio River. So, my adopted state here of Ohio, yeah, we can lay claim to being the birthplace of biotechnology. Corn, 1,500 tons are produced per cycle in these massive airlift fermenters. Really incredible biotechnological innovations were involved in actually perfecting this method. Treating, next theme. I'm not going to talk about this much. I wrote an article that was published in 2016 with the provocative title, "Are Mushrooms Medicinal?" I said no. I still stick to that. Show me the evidence. That's what I'm looking for. The evidence is lacking that products like this on the right actually provide memory and nerve support. There's a huge amount of fascinating research going on in this area on fungi like the lion's mane shown on the left here that contains some individual compounds that have a profound effect upon the growth of nerve cells, at least in culture, and there's some interesting experiments on rodents, but we're a long way from actually having anything that could possibly be sensibly commercialized. I'm optimistic in this area of inquiry because if we look at fungi, we look at fungi in nature, they're interacting with all of the other or many other organisms in their woodland habitats. So something like this, the bird's nest fungi produce these nests that seem to be generated by sort of impossibly small birds that contain these capsules that are splashed. I got a video for you here by raindrops. Ka-ching, look at the thing. Splashed into the air. So I'm interested in spore release as a research scientist. These fungi produce some very potent antibiotics. There is a lot of scope for research on the production of pharmaceutically active compounds in the fungi. The antibiotics produced by the bird's nest fungi have also never been commercialized, but boy, there's a lot of work going on in this area. And I talk about experiments with gene mining to begin to look for potentially useful compounds that are produced by fungi. Poisoning and dreaming I'm going to talk about. Poisonous mushrooms like this, death cap mushroom, demonstrate the unambiguous effects of mushrooms on human physiology. Another good reason for thinking that, fungi are going to have compounds that may be useful in medicine. The ergot fungus, distressing painting here from Bruegel from the 16th century. The ergot fungus responsible for vasoconstriction, and in this case, you can see the penitents, the mendiants, le mendiants, that have suffered from limb loss. We could talk more about this. I am cognizant of the time here. So they ate contaminated rye flour that contains mycotoxins that had these, ravaged their bodies. Dreaming, another beautiful example of the way that fungi produce compounds that interact with our physiology. Psilocybin. Psilocybin, when one consumes magic mushrooms, the psilocybin is converted into a compound called psilocin, shown on the image here. When it enters the bloodstream, that mimics serotonin, has these profound effects upon our cognition. Lots of research right now, clearly promising research on the way that psilocybin might be used to treat clinical depression and many other conditions, anorexia, post-traumatic stress disorder, a whole slew of different conditions. So very, very exciting field. In researching the book, I went back and looked at a lot of work on medicinal mushrooms and fans of the medicinal, not the medicinal mushroom, the hallucinogenic mushroom experience. And I talk in the book about, there's so much wishful thinking about this, unfortunately. I'm back to the 1970s with the great Terence McKenna, I waded through his work, and I thought his pronouncements on alien mushrooms are one of the least enlightening things ever written about fungi. On the flip side, however, I've become more open, more interested in the possibility that there might be some relationship between the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms and the early roots of Christianity. This again was a suggestion that was made in the 70s. Planquereau Chapel in central France, this famous wall painting was featured in a book that was published in 1970 with the suggestion that rather than the Tree of Life, going back to the Milton's Paradise Lost here, wasn't really a tree, that it was well, it was a mushroom tree that's shown here. It was a tree formed from fly agaric mushrooms. And if you look carefully at the painting, you can see the serpent proffering the forbidden fruit towards Eve. I sort of dismissed this at the time, but there are some really interesting wall paintings in Europe. You can look at this one from Saint-Martin de Vic in France. There's been some good scholarship on this recently. What's that monk doing there? Is he harvesting from a mushroom tree? And then also in the same church, you've got this image of the Last Supper, and you can see those folds underneath the gowns of the disciples. Boy, they look awfully mushroomy, don't they? Another one here, another church in France. Boy, they look like mushrooms. What's going on here? So it's not beyond, you know, the realms of possibility that sort of early strains of Christianity, if you go back to the Desert Fathers and this great diversity of belief, maybe some of those ideas, some of those beliefs had some relationship with what? The ritualistic use of mushrooms. I'm going to keep an open mind on this issue. Whether or not you consume magic mushrooms, I hope that this is, if you close your eyes, this is what you experience. This is certainly an average image from, you know, whenever I close my eyes without psilocybin. Ultimate extension of the human-fungus symbiosis comes in the form of our dependence upon the activities of mushrooms and other fungi in nature. They're the great decomposers. They spin the carbon cycle. We're dependent upon this. Mycorrhizal fungi interact with the roots of forest trees like we see here and other plants, and are absolutely crucial for supporting Earth's botany. Earth's botany. Does botany exist anywhere else? Do the fungi exist anywhere else? Terence McKenna said that fungi had come from space. Well, let's look at that a little bit further. How far have we actually stretched the human microbiome? Well, it's got to the moon. We got it to the moon in the form of jettison sacks that contain wastes from the astronauts that were dumped on the lunar surface. The Apollo landings in the 60s and 70s. You can see here this jettison bag. I'd love to get one of these back to Earth, and we'd find these sort of a freeze-dried archive of the microbiome from the astronauts. So we've got our fungi. We've got the fungi that interact with the human body all the way to our satellite. So I had that qualifier. I said Earth's botany. You know, we don't know that botany or mycology exists anywhere else. But I'm going to end this by suggesting that I'm open to the idea of alien mushrooms. So Terence McKenna, for any of you that are aware of his work, would be impressed by this, I think. Just going to give you a brief quote from the last chapter in the book, Molds, Mushrooms, and Medicines. Kepler 1649c is an Earth-sized planet in the constellation Cygnus, 300 light years from our solar system. With its close orbit to a small star, climate models suggest it is quite Earth-like in temperature. If Kepler 1649 is watery, it seems likely to harbor life. And if it accommodates anything more complicated than our bacteria, it is certain to be populated with fungi. Confidence in this untestable hypothesis is born from understanding the essence of fungi here on Earth. Our fungi are the agents of entropy, transforming the energy captured in the web of life into the raw materials for the continuous regeneration of the biosphere. Without a group of organisms with these properties, the ecosystems of rocky worlds like Kepler would stall as planetary compost heaps of untappable energy. They must be there. So this has been the story of the fungi near and far. They're everywhere and will outlive us by an eternity. In mycospiramus, in fungi, we trust. Thank you for your attention. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to members, associates of the Linnean Society of London. So thank you so much. And I will end this screen share. And if there are any questions, I will be delighted to stay with you for a few minutes.
There certainly are. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for that incredible gallop through the world of fungi. And as a former English literature student, it's always nice to see John Milton getting a name check at the Linnean Society. It's not something that happens very often. I'm going to plunge right into the questions because we've got about 15 minutes or so left. And I'll start with Ian Tuff, who asks, what effect is climate change having on the world of fungi?
Climate change is having a profound effect upon the distribution of fungi. So there have been studies, well, going back actually, more than a decade now, looking at the fruiting patterns that we see in mushrooms. The best work actually was done in Scandinavia, and actually looking at sort of in fact, the fruiting season has been extended, and with warming temperatures, this has just really changed the it's actually changed the period over which the fungi seem to be fruiting. There are other experiments that show that rates of fungal decomposition are probably increasing, that fungi, because it's warmer, makes sense, they're able to degrade fallen trees, for example, more swiftly than they would on a cooler planet. The distribution of the fungi that cause human diseases is also changing. So those patterns are changing. What I said when I was talking about Candida auris is that I'm not convinced that climate change is actually driving the sort of the microevolution of the fungi in a way that would actually affect their nastiness towards the human body.
Jessica asks, could a Last of Us scenario ever occur? This is a computer game based on the idea of cordyceps taking over humans and
right.
altering their behavior. Is that plausible?
Well, not that a cordyceps would do it, but indeed fungi that grow in the brain, and particularly in a serious brain infection, change our behavior. So to that extent, we can look at the way that fungi like species of Cryptococcus, this is a yeast that actually grows in the brain, will apparently cause changes in behavior in those patients. But the idea that a cordyceps is going to take root in us and burst out of the human skull as some of these fungi do when they infect insects. I think that's a little bit far-fetched, but I'm of the opinion that and it was actually it was a show on television too, HBO, The Last of Us. I mean, if it's getting students, if it's getting young people interested in fungi, that's a good thing.
For sure. Jonathan asks, what is the impact of our changing diet, particularly a typical Western diet, on the fungi in the body?
That's a great question. And there have been quite a few studies performed on this showing changes in the microbiome, fungi in the gut, related to diet. Some of the most interesting work has actually come from China, showing that people that maybe move from a farming community, a rural community, and move into a city, and there's certainly in that process their diet's changing quite profoundly, and actually their diet, the diversity in their diets is being reduced. But yeah, they showed significant changes in the numbers and the kinds of yeasts that are found in their guts. Now, the knock-on effect of this on their health, again, it relates to this cause and effect relationship. Many things change when people move from place to place, but yeah, really interesting work. Studies also, there needs to be more work done on this, looking at differences between a vegetarian or vegan diet and somebody that's eating meat or a more omnivorous diet. But yeah, it's really interesting area of inquiry.
A sort of a related question from Tom, I suppose. He says, is there anything you do personally to be at one with fungi, his expression? And he's thinking practically like taking supplements or particular foods in your
That's
own
a,
life.
that's a good question. I mean, I've actually never, it's ridiculous. I've never tried magic mushrooms, and that's take longer to explain why. But with a delicate mechanism like this, I can't play with it. Um, we have a farmer's market in the little town in Ohio where I live, and there's a young couple that sell mushrooms that they grow on their farm, and I'm a regular customer. I love to eat their mushrooms, and this is a great. It changes the texture, if not really the taste of a meal. So yeah, I certainly eat a lot of mushrooms from the farmer's market, and I'm actually not very good at identifying mushrooms in the field, so I'm a bit wary about which mushrooms I might, pick from nature, other than something obvious like an oyster mushroom, and actually try it. But yeah, supplements. It's actually one supplement works apparently in terms of clinically reliable trials. It's some what is it? It's called Beladi or Beladii. It's a yeast supplement that's actually used to treat traveler's diarrhea, and apparently it will actually reset the gut after an episode of food poisoning. And so that's something I'd certainly try it if I was afflicted in that fashion. Many of the other supplements, I don't believe it. Mushroom coffee.
Let's move away from digestion for a moment. Jack asks, is there known synergy between subterranean fungi and nematodes?
There's a lot of work that's been done actually on nematode trapping fungi. So these are fungi that grow in the soil, and they produce these elaborate traps, actually microscopic traps that because the nematodes are actually predators of the fungi. They'll actually use they've got a sort of needle-shaped mouth part that they use to puncture mycelia. And so there are some fungi that combat them and then use them as a source of protein, as a source of nitrogen. And these traps, there's one trap that actually inflates, and it actually acts as a noose and traps the nematode. And there are others with sticky knobs on them that the nematodes, and you see them writhing and trying to get away. There's a trap with these spiky balls on it. Yeah, absolutely fascinating interactions between fungi and many soil invertebrates, including the nematodes.
Questions are coming in thick and fast, and I'm sorry, we're not going to have time to get to all of them, but we've got time for a few more. Sally asks, you mentioned a bit about the importance of fungi with respect to the decomposition of the human body. Can you speak to the idea of mushroom burial sites, such as the one popularized by J. Rim Lee?
Absolutely. Save your money. Save your as other mycologists pointed out, the mushroom suits, at least the ones that I'm aware of, are infused with mycelia of mushroom-forming fungi that are involved in the decomposition of plant debris. Now, those fungi do produce proteases. They're capable of breaking down proteins. Our bodies are more protein-rich than plants, but you're working with the wrong fungi there. So yeah, the mushroom burial suit. I don't know if the company's actually still solvent, but it seems suspicious to me.
So, Ikhtiar asks, particularly about the treatment of Parkinson's disease and fungi. He says, can lion's mane be used to alleviate symptoms of Parkinson's? Is there any research to support the use of fungi in the treatment of Parkinson's?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously one has a lot of sympathy for people that would benefit from this kind of treatment. Perhaps we all would. But the evidence is lacking. Lion's mane contains compounds that have proven effects upon nerve cells in culture. There are some experiments on rodents that have actually got their limitations. So at this point, the evidence is lacking, especially if you're going to be consuming this. It'll be digested in the acid bath of the stomach. Are any of these compounds actually going to get into the bloodstream? The evidence isn't there, but I'm hopeful that for the future of what mycomedicine, could be a lot more promising than it actually is today. I mean, having said that, we use fungal drugs for all kinds of treatments. I mean, genetically modified yeast is the source of half of the world's insulin, human insulin, that's actually, the diabetic patients use. And so, yeah, fungi, yeah, and fungi used to produce antibiotics and compounds that modify our immune response. Yeah, there's a promising future.
Hmm. Natasha asks, I've heard a bit about fungi in the ocean that break down plastic, and I'm also aware of the products made from mushrooms to replace plastic. How viable do you think these
That's a
solutions
great
are?
question. So there are fungi again in labs in the lab. They'll actually show their capability to break down plastics. Scale is everything. Could we actually use this in nature to deal with the mountains of plastic waste that we produce? Right now, no, but this is something that absolutely is worth exploring. Yeah, worth exploring further. I mean, there are fungi that will degrade all kinds of hydrocarbons. Could be used in what? Treatment after an oil tanker leaks. But I mean, we're not at the stage that this is really going to be of any use
Hmm.
at this point. Beyond the lab. Interesting. Watch this space.
I think inevitably we're going to have to return to the digestive system. Jessica asks whether you could say a bit more about the link between inflammatory bowel diseases and fungi. Any suggested reading or
Yeah, I would say so. There've actually been a lot of clinical studies on this. This is really something. I mean, a Google search will get you to all kinds of peer-reviewed papers on this. I mean, you've got to be, beware of extraordinary claims that are made about this. But the research is interesting. The research shows what? The research shows that in patients suffering from irritable bowel disease or diseases, spectrum of diseases, that the collection of fungi found in their guts are different from those in people that are not actually afflicted with irritable bowel disease, which is an extremely unpleasant inflammatory condition. Absolutely. So the relationship between cause and effect, though, is not established. And that's what we need to see. But our immune systems interact with fungi. Indeed, if there's overgrowth of fungi, this induces an inflammatory reaction, the immune system being enriched in the gut. You can begin to make a very plausible case for some relationship there. But in terms of what one might do to change that balance and whether that would have an effect upon one's condition, we're not there yet in medicine.
hmm. We're coming to the end of our time, I'm afraid. So I'm going to end with a question from Raoul, which is very simply, what is your favorite kind of agaricus? And I might expand that to say, what's your favorite kind of fungi?
Favorite kind of agaricus, that is specific. I
It's
mean,
very specific.
favorite fungus. I mean, it changes with the changes with the day, I suppose. But that artillery fungus absolutely fascinates me. I gave a talk about this actually at a Moravian Christian college in America a while ago. More about the biomechanics, and I got through with explaining how this thing worked, and I had this smart student at the front of the class, and he raised his hand and he said, this was a really interesting talk. He said, you've absolutely convinced me that intelligent design is the way that these beautiful structures developed. Because clearly this natural selection couldn't have made anything this fantastically elaborate. So at that point, and I please the audience, but not in the way that I would have done as an evolutionary biologist. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and apologies to everyone in the crowd who had questions that we weren't able to get to in the end. It just remains for me to say thank you so much to Nicholas for a fascinating talk, and thank you to everybody for coming. I hope you will join us next time. But until then, a very good evening.
Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you. Cheerio, everyone.